On this edition of Independent Sources, Island Cops, Haitian-born New York police officers serve and protect in the shadow of ruins.
Difficult and deadly, a filmmaker turns his camera on investigative journalists braving the wrath of Mexican drug cartels.
And the Green Transformation, providing assistance to Brooklyn residents who want more energy-efficient homes.
Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Gary Pierre-Pierre.
And I'm Viano Ravinka. Shortly after the devastating earthquake that hit Haiti in January 2010, the NYPD and the U.S. State Department came up with an innovative project. Haitian-born police officers would work alongside their counterparts in the island nation to help them develop better police practices.
It's been 3 years since the quake, and the rebuilding process has plodded along. I recently spoke with Sergeant Sergio, one of the officers who took part in the project. We talked about whether he felt they had made an impact on Haiti's justice system. Sergeant Guiteau, 8 months after the earthquake in 2010, the NYPD sent 6 officers to Haiti to work with the police department there. What was the genesis of that program?
Well, it all started because there were so many kidnappings in Haiti, and they had asked the police commissioner if he could do some training with anti-kidnapping, which they were going to bring some Haitian National Police officers to New York to take the training, but things didn't work out. So after the earthquake, it was proposed that instead of doing training in just anti-kidnapping, to see if we can send police officers there to train as much as they can. And the State Department approached the police commissioner, and they agreed. And finally, in August of 2010, 6 of us went to Haiti.
And you were one of the first group.
Right, I was the first supervisor, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you went there, what did you find at the Haitian Police Department?
We started working with the Direction Centrale de la Police Judiciaire, which is their investigative body,
okay.
And in particularly with anti-kidnapping.
Okay.
So, and luckily for us, we had 2 top-notch detectives with us that was able to really blend in and help them. Okay. And also part of the DCPJ is the Bureau of Protection of Minors.
Okay.
And my cops help there, because
okay.
they are so familiar with working with juveniles.
And tell us a little bit about the work on the ground. I mean, you've walked the beats in New York City, and
right.
What is it like walking the beat in Haiti?
Well, at first, we started going to the camps. Things were still a little chaotic then. Everybody was very happy to see us. Mainly, well, first of all, because we NYPD, because we actually worked in full uniforms.
Okay.
With a gun belt and everything. And
were you allowed to carry weapons?
That's correct. That's one of the things that...
One of the conditions?
One of the conditions that the State Department did with the Haiti government to allow us to bring our weapon to Haiti to work. So, I mean, full uniform.
Okay.
The gun belt, the vest, etc. And things worked fairly well. People were very happy to see us at the camp. But once we started working with DCPJ, things really evolved a lot more. First thing we did was try to make them do some case management. Because what happens, Direction Centrale is for the whole country.
The headquarters.
The headquarters.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, wherever there's a kidnapping, that's where they come. Whether it happens in the northern part of the country or in Port-au-Prince itself, that they have to investigate. And we try to do some case management with them, which they finally took to doing, and the way they assign their cases to their investigators. The way the guys help is they assist in any way they can, in the interviews, in planning for operations. We don't actually go to operations because we don't have any police powers there. We can make arrests.
Okay.
but we take part in the planning, and after the operations, sometimes we go to the scene to help them to recover certain evidences and stuff. And you know, to my surprise, you know, they really took and to be quite frank with you, with the little resources that they have, they do fairly well.
Okay.
Right.
At the beginning, you said that kidnapping was a major issue. What is it now? Is kidnapping still one of the major issues, or has it evolved to other crime that they need help combating?
Well, you know, kidnappings is always, this is what makes the headlines. But crimes is it happens everywhere. You know, it all depends on what part of the country you are, what part of Port-au-Prince you are. Whether it's a burglary, breaking into a house, or simple theft out in the street. You know, one of the problems that I see is that unfortunately, the Haitian National Police does not have the proper equipment to patrol properly.
What do they have and what do they need?
They need just about everything. I mean, they don't have they don't have enough cars, and if they have the cars, they don't have the fuel to put in there, and the manpower. You know, it's one thing, because you know, for a country of 8 million people to have only 10,000 police officers, you know, I don't think it's enough. Okay. You look at NYPD, for example. You know, we have approximately 35,000 cops. You know,
for roughly 8-9 million people.
Correct, and if you ask some people, they tell you it's not enough. So, you know, so but they do what they can. To me, the omnipresence is not there. So as a result, people feel that there's some sort of insecurity in the country.
Okay. What impact do you think the NYPD presence has made there? And also, you said the population welcomed you. What about your counterparts in the Haitian Police Department?
Well, that's one of the greatest things, and that's what the State Department likes. It's the fact that every single NYPD officer that goes to Haiti speak fluent Haitian Creole. We know the culture, and we're very well embraced. So there's no communication problem, and it's a marriage made in heaven. So we go over there, we start working with them right away. They welcome us, and they look for the advice all the time, and it makes going there really worthwhile, and the work really progresses very well. Is the country making a turn for the better, in your opinion? I do believe. I mean, you have to understand that the Haitian National Police is in its baby stage. They what, 15, 17 years old? 97, right. 96. So, and you know, you can't expect them to be a professional police department such as NYPD. So I think they're past their crawling, and they're starting to walk finally. There's a lot of improvement that's being made, a lot of arrest, and one of the biggest problems is that most of the crimes are committed by gangs, and now they're starting to identify some of the gangs, some of the gang members, and the arrests are being made. And even prior to the earthquake, you know, they had made some significant progress, but unfortunately, after the earthquake, chaos. The prison, everybody was got out of the prison, so a lot of the repeaters are people that were already they were incarcerated. That escaped. The escapees were actually the ones that are making the biggest. Combined with some of the deportees that are going to Haiti now, you know, they go and I guess they see the opportunity, you know, because crime is is a thing of opportunity. They see the opportunity and they take it. Exactly, you know. And when you can kidnap somebody and then ask for upwards of $500,000. American dollars. American dollars for that, US dollars for that. And then a lot of time, a good portion of it is paid. Okay. It is a business, all right, unfortunately. Well, yeah. Unfortunately, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Sergeant Guito, for joining us. My pleasure, and anytime you want me to come back, Gary, I'll be more than happy to. Thank you.
Still to come on the show, the war on Mexico's journalist.
Before that, Abby Shola has some other news.
Thanks, Vianora. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic and community media. A group of high-profile civil rights lawyers in New York City are pleading with the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York to stop NYPD surveillance of Muslims. Desi Talk reports that a brief signed by New York University law professor Paul Schiavini was filed on February 4th in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York. The brief argues that NYPD surveillance is illegal and violates a 1985 court decree limiting police intelligence gathering. The Forward reports that the federally backed library subsidy program called E-Rate has devoted $1.4 million to some ultra-Orthodox religious institutions in Brooklyn that don't qualify as libraries. The Forward found that 9 groups have received an average of $161,000 each from E-Rate since 2010. Yet some of the facilities have no librarian and limited collections of books. The Metropolitan New York Library Council, which oversees E-Rate, says they chose not to exclude these institutions. The group has since changed the guidelines, which now requires a library to have a librarian and online card catalogs. Day laborers without permanent employment fear they may be left out of immigration reform. La Tribuna Hispania reports that since day laborers look for work in the streets and don't have permanent bosses, they may run into problems when trying to legalize their status. An immigration reform bill would likely require undocumented immigrants to confirm that they have a job, which is impossible for most day laborers. A group called NDLON was scheduled to put together a lobbying campaign on February 12th and 13th on Capitol Hill to urge politicians to remove the clause on providing proof of permanent employment. A pop-up bookstore catering to the LGBT community will soon have a permanent home. The Bureau of General Services Queer Division, currently housed in the Strange Loop Gallery on the Lower East Side, is the only LGBT bookstore left in Manhattan. As the owners work on moving into a permanent location, they say their goal is to rethink the meaning of a gay bookstore. They plan to do this by calling it a queer bookstore so they can appeal to a wider audience, which includes heterosexuals who identify as queer. And finally, from Sahara Reporters, Nigeria is the 2013 champion of the Africa Cup of Nations. The Super Eagles, Nigeria's soccer team, defeated Burkina Faso 1-0, marking the 3rd time the West African nation has taken the title. This year's win marks Nigeria's first since 1994. As the winners of Africa's Nations Cup, Nigeria will represent Africa later this year at the FIFA Confederations Cup. Those were just a few headlines from the ethnic and community media. Back to Gary and Vianora.
Thanks, Abby. The stories of drug lords running Mexico with impunity have almost become the stuff of a Hollywood film. But their carnage and corruption are quite real. So real that some believe that the world may soon become desensitized to the violence and its victims.
The documentary Reportero tells the story of journalists from the Tijuana-based newspaper Zeta. The paper has been covering Mexico for more than 30 years. I spoke with the movie's director, Bernardo Ruiz, about his film. Bernardo, one article had that in your film you did not want to dwell on the dead and that you much rather wanted to celebrate the accomplishments of the reporters at this new newspaper. Tell us why you were interested in that.
Sure. So when I first started Reportero, I was obviously listening to and reading as much of the U.S. coverage on Mexico as I could. And one of the phenomena that I was seeing play out was in the cable media especially, there was a lot of what I would call rubbernecking journalism or body count journalism. So we'd get information about a massacre in a particular place, a shooting in another place, but with no context, and certainly no stories about people. So what was startling to me was the total lack of humanity in the coverage about a lot of the violence in Mexico. So part of what prompted me to make Reportero was to tell a story with a human side and to look at people on the ground who are doing very difficult work, often laboring invisibly, not getting any credit, but who are kind of bucking the trend in some ways. So for me, what was important was to try to put a human face on a very difficult situation.
Tell us about SETA, this paper. There's no relation to the cartel.
Right.
How did they choose their name?
So SETA actually predates the organized crime group of the same name or a similar name. SETA really came out of, it was the brainchild of Jesus Blanco-Ornelas and Hector Felix Miranda, two very bold reporters. And Jesus Blanco-Ornelas had been fired from 5 different papers. And the last paper that he'd been pushed out of was a daily called ABC or ABC. And so when he and Hector Felix Miranda were talking about beginning a new paper, they thought, well, let's go from one end of the alphabet, from ABC to Z, hence SETA. So in April of 1980, SETA was born as an independent weekly, a very aggressive, oppositional weekly, and even from the very beginning, they began printing in the United States.
So it's a Tijuana-based paper, meaning that they're covering crime happening and government corruption happening in Tijuana, but they're printing out of California. Why did they choose to print out of California? For safety reasons, that's one, right? If you could elaborate on that.
Sure. It's one of the things that we see in the film, and one of the things that was, it was an interesting discovery in the research process that SETA, to this day, 32 plus years after its founding, they continue to print across the border just south of San Diego. And initially they began printing in California because the government, in the early days of the paper's founding, the government controlled paper sales. So if they liked what you were printing, you'd get paper. If they didn't like what you were printing, all of a sudden paper would become unavailable or the rates would go up. So in a way to kind of avoid the de facto censorship of, that happened through paper sales, SETA began printing out in California.
You mentioned already that a lot of the reporters at SETA are publishing anonymously. How difficult was it for you to get this journalist, Sergio Haro, to collaborate with you on the film?
I think so much of documentary filmmaking is really about timing. I think as filmmakers, we would like to take credit for these things, but really I think in this particular case, it was a situation where I was looking for a way to articulate a story about the U.S.-Mexico border and the conflict, but through the lens of a reporter. And when I met Sergio Haro, who I met through various contacts in the border city of Mexicali, when I started working with him, I realized that it was in some ways a good time for him as well. He was ready to share his nearly 3 decades of reporting experience, and I think the film was an opportunity for him to reflect on that work. Now, having said that, to your point, SETA has had a very storied and difficult history in terms of its the responses to the paper from organized crime groups. And yes, they do have a collective byline for the more heavy-hitting organized crime articles, especially those articles that link organized crime to political corruption. But Sergio contributes to those articles, but he also is doing a lot of the day-to-day articles, the stories about people, just regular people in Mexicali and in Tijuana and in the Baja Norte region in general. And there are, I think for those stories, there wasn't as much concern about his safety. It was the bigger crime pieces that represented some difficulty.
And SETA has had its share of violence, of a history of violence. Tell us about that.
So SETA, throughout its now nearly 33-year history, has had at least 3 staffers killed. And the paper's founder, Jesus Blanco-Ornelas, was famously set upon by 10 armed gunmen in 1997. He was just a few blocks from the newspaper, and gunmen purportedly from the Arellano Felix cartel arrived, surrounded the vehicle that he was in, and began firing a volley of shots at him. Blanco-Ornelas' driver and bodyguard, a gentleman named Luis Valero, covered Jesus Blanco-Ornelas, and really saving his life in part. And then there was this freak accident. It's a sequence that we cover pretty extensively in the film. but the lead hitman who's firing at Blancornelas fires a bullet, and a piece of shrapnel from the bullet ricochets off the vehicle and goes into his eye, killing him instantly. And the gunman falls and is just, oozing blood. And his colleagues basically decide to flee at that point. So the person who's leading the operation falls dead, the other gunmen flee, and it's really that plus Luis Valero's actions that saved Blancornelas' life. Blancornelas was subsequently hospitalized, but survived for another 9 years, almost a decade, continuing ratcheting up his coverage of organized crime. He didn't let up after that.
Are you promoting your film to the Mexican audience?
We had a fantastic series of exhibitions in Mexico through a festival called Ambulante, and it was started by the actors Diego Luna and Gael Garcia Bernal. And what they do is they take films and they'll go on a 12-city tour of Mexico, screening the film in shopping malls, outdoor plazas, universities, sometimes open-air markets. I mean, really, it's a broad range of venues. So Reportero screened in at least 12 cities in Mexico. We also screened in El Salvador.
What have been the reactions to your film, both in Mexico and here?
I was worried about what the response would be from audiences in Mexico. So I attended a number of screenings in Mexico, but I think one of the most interesting screenings was in Tijuana, in the city where much of the story takes place. And a woman came up to me after one of the screenings and told me that she had been at home washing dishes on the day that Blancornelas was attacked by the 10 armed gunmen, and that she'd heard the volley of shots. She'd stopped washing her dishes, but it was a time in Tijuana's history where there was just so much violence that she didn't dare go outside, and she also just didn't want to know what had happened. So she had just she tried to put the incident out of her mind. And she came to a screening, and she said that the screening was the first time that she learned details about this attack that had taken place just a few blocks from her house. So in general, I heard many of those types of stories where people knew the story or they knew pieces of the story, but Reportero for them was, it was an opportunity to have a more comprehensive picture of this newspaper and in general the job of reporting in these small regional, for these small regional papers in Mexico.
Final question, if you could say it in a few seconds. Why aren't more Mexican papers doing what Zeta is doing, publishing, printing outside the border?
I think that there are a number of papers in Mexico. Zeta is by no means the only paper doing aggressive coverage on organized crime, but the smaller regional papers are the ones who face the greatest risk and are the ones that need the biggest amount of support. There have been grenade attacks, there have been murders where photojournalists and reporters have been butchered, offices have been attacked. The regional press in Mexico is under siege, and Zeta is emblematic of a type of paper that continues to fight back, but there are certainly other people doing it in Mexico.
Bernardo Ruiz, thank you for being in studio with us today.
Thank you for the invitation.
When we come back, bringing affordable green technology to Brooklyn. And finally, going green isn't the first thing that comes to mind when imagining Cypress Hills, Brooklyn. But that's exactly what the neighborhood is doing.
The Cypress Hills Verde program is about much more than just growing fruits and vegetables. It also envisions a community where residents live in energy-efficient homes and sustain themselves with green jobs. Reporter Kizzy Cox has the story on the neighborhood's green transformation.
Luis Cruz, a Cypress Hills resident for 10 years, got his home here on Logan Street retrofitted 1 year ago. Before getting the work done, expensive energy bills were a big issue.
The problem that I had was the high cost of keeping the house warm in the winter and cold in the summer. There was a lot of air escaping and some windows didn't close or work properly.
No trabajan correctamente.
Weatherization retrofitting makes homes energy efficient by improving insulation, fixing drafting windows and doors, and installing low-flow faucets and toilets. As a custodian and father of 4, Cruz could have never afforded the improvements on his own, nor can many of his neighbors. 34% of East New York Cypress Hills residents live below poverty level, making federal funding all the more crucial.
I think that it's really useful for the community, especially for a working class community that doesn't have the ability to invest in big home improvements.
Cruz's retrofit was funded by the Weatherization Assistance Program, or WAP, which pays for retrofits for low-income residents throughout New York City. He found out about the program through Cypress Hills Local Development Corporation, also known as CHLDC. The organization launched Cypress Hills Verde, a wide-scale green initiative aimed at transforming the neighborhood. The retrofit is saving Cruz $100 a month in energy bills.
I've seen a substantial reduction with the energy that's used in the house. It feels much warmer in the house during the winter and much cooler in the summer.
Residents of East New York Cypress Hills have long struggled with challenges related to energy efficiency and the environment. For instance, the largely Black and Latino neighborhood has a higher rate of asthma than New York as a whole, according to the latest city statistics. Some see the weatherization program as part of a larger effort to uplift communities weighed down by social, economic, and health issues.
For us, it's really a question of social, environmental, economic justice to improve the environment in the communities that are the most affected by pollution, by all of the effects of the dirty energy economy.
Shepherd's program trains young people from underserved communities for jobs in the green economy. It's partnered with CHLDC with the goal of creating a greener environment. The program has its challenges, though. The 2 homes behind me are a prime example. Both homes needed retrofits and their owners applied for them last spring. Luis Cruz's home, which we saw earlier, has already been retrofitted. But Roberto Diaz is still waiting for the retrofits 1 year later. The program requirements are so strict, it leaves residents like Roberto out in the cold and sweltering in the heat.
Me inspeccionaron la casa.
They inspected my home and told me that in order to begin the work, I had to finish the entire 2nd floor because the apartment was in such a bad state. The process took about 5 months to complete because of the economy. I spent about $25,000.
$25,000.
Not everyone can afford to pay that much money. Green City Forces program manager Erica Simmons points out that recent changes to the federal program have made getting funds difficult for lower-income residents.
Problems like asbestos, mold, and roof leaks have to be addressed beforehand. So when the money isn't there to address those things, and it costs people a lot of money to get those things fixed, it's definitely a barrier.
Betsy McLean, who oversees the Cypress Hills Verde program, is well aware of these barriers and is developing alternatives so people who can't afford the retrofit can still benefit.
We're working hard to set up a kind of a micro loan program so that people are able to access loans anywhere from kind of $5,000 up to $25,000 to do some major capital repairs that they can pay for over time that have low interest or no interest rates.
This would allow many more residents to qualify for the retrofit. So far, about 250 private homes have been retrofitted, but many more homes and apartments may be eligible. Meanwhile, Diaz continues to wait, but he says the wait's worth it if he can save big like his neighbor did.
When you have a house, the house is like a child. The effort is worth the pain. For example, the day that you say you're going to do whatever to your property, well, you're doing something that's worth the pain too.
Kizzy Cox, reporting for Independent Sources.
That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned.
Hope you'll join us again next time.
Till then, be independent-minded.